Welcome everybody. It's myself, Kevin Lee, and Charlie Shaw, aka Lil Mel. What's going on, man?
Not much, man. Welcome back to. Thank you for welcoming me back to your show, and looking forward to having an interesting talk about law enforcement.
Oh, we can go on for days, but before we do, we were talking about your show, and you said you were gonna change up your format a little bit.
Yeah. Like I said, I started in January with the Lil Mel podcast, Lil Mel Unfiltered podcast show. Enjoyed every moment of it. However, I can't get away from what I already know, and that's the the crime part of it.
Right.
My career in law enforcement. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch it up starting in April. This will be the introduction show to it. What we're going to do now is we're going to start up a podcast show called True Crime Travel.
Okay.
And what I'm going to do in that show is I'm going to travel around different cities throughout the United States, maybe international, because I am going to take a little birthday trip to Jamaica in May. So what I plan on doing is discussing the travel part of it, and salute the cities that I'm going to. But I'm going to give the good, bad, and ugly on this city. I may more so talk about what the current events, past, historical cases.
All right.
Sort of like your 2020 show, 48 hours. We're going to discuss different cases and what's going on with them. Some are solved, some are not. But we're going to discuss that.
Yeah, and the good thing about those shows too is like sometimes the first set of eyes can also help with things that technology back in the day, like DNA becoming more prevalent and things like that. So yeah.
Interesting thing is I've been doing some homework on different topics, different incidents that have happened, and I noticed that as far back as early '90s, the technology has changed drastically.
Yes.
It's a good thing that a lot of good investigators held on to DNA for so many years, because now they're solving a lot of cases, data cases, missing persons, violent crimes where DNA was left, assaults, rapes, what have you.
Don't you have to be like a real visionary for that? Because that's amazing. Because I've watched a lot of those shows too, where like things that happened in '50s and '60s, like they have kept that evidence. Like how'd you know DNA was coming, or that will be valuable one day? It's amazing that.
Well, once again, God gave us minds.
Right.
Had us, think about things. Maybe this might be something that could help an investigator later on down the road when I'm gone. It's amazing how we're projecting.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with projection.
Oh.
So save everything. That cigarette butt, that little stain that you think is it was a paint mistake, but actually that was blood.
Well, it's interesting because it also leads into like what probably my show's gonna be later, but describing detective work ethic is amazing because they that 20-year case that you can't solve, like that's real. Like there are guys that are girls that are like, oh yeah, wow, like how did this turn out? Like I couldn't solve this, or hey, I just thought of something. They're still phoning in.
Right, they're still phoning in. I don't know if I'm gonna phone in on any of the.
Yeah, you will.
You found out something. Well, there's a couple. There's a couple fugitives that I'm interested in, relocating.
Right.
If I ever go to that area, I'm gonna, ask the investigators or ask the deputies if they've been working on it.
Yeah.
But my last few years in marshal service, I didn't really get a chance to do any in-depth investigations because I was, in the management part of it.
Right.
And that was a handful by itself.
It is a body of work.
Right.
And you're not gonna. There's something that you didn't, especially if it was assigned to you or something you personally worked on or somebody you knew. Yeah, you can't let that go. Like you're not gonna like walk back into that town and go, that's the last thing on your mind. It's gonna be like the first thing on your mind.
And some of the cases that I'm gonna explore while I'm trying not to say while I'm in the city, I'm gonna be on vacation.
Right.
And I'm going to talk about that. Good example. You've ever been to Savannah?
Yeah.
Okay, Savannah is known for their mystery tours and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I was reading up on this one story where, you know, it was an axe murder. You know, and I'm like, wow, that's interesting. You know, originally you know, it happened in a predominantly black neighborhood, you know, across the railroad tracks.
Right.
And it wasn't, you know, they thought that black folks did something to these white folks over there, but it wasn't that. It was just easy to blame on them at that particular time in the early 1900s.
Right.
But it turned out to be something than what it is. So that's a teaser for one of the shows.
Georgia has a lot of that. I was actually talking to a friend of mine about because they didn't know the Atlanta murders back in the early '80s. That was kind of
when we were kids.
Oh yeah, and that was one of those you know, FBI profile. I love this story because like my grandmother solved it because they couldn't find.
She knew it was black dude.
Yeah, she
had
did.
to be somebody in the community.
She said there's no way because that the FBI profile was like a white guy, and the typical profile. And she's like, I remember sitting there being a little kid watching her. She's looking at the TV. She's like, there's a black guy doing that. They would have the white guy would have spotted so quick. And she just kind of dissected everything. I'm like,
yeah,
holy crap. She was onto something. And it was the most unassuming person in the neighborhood.
Right. Because, you know, in like little small towns like that, man, everybody know everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, we're here in Lakeland area. You know, it's not a small town, but we're less than 6 degrees separated from one another.
And getting back to the grandma thing, you're watching The Heat of the Night, the
Oh,
TV show. Now, just because you said that, it reminds me like whenever there was a crime, they'd have to go down to the bottoms.
Right.
And they sound like the one or two black detectives. And it's like, those people by now know who you are.
They know who you are.
That's not like a real thing. I love the show, but I'm like, yeah, it's like, oh, they're the cops over there. That's the way it really works. They know you don't belong there. You don't live there.
Right.
The town ain't that big.
It's not that big. You just moseyed into town, huh?
No. Sorry, I love that show. But I'm just saying that was one of those things that always bugged me.
Right.
Because there's always a black town with a name there, and there was the bottoms. Hell,
Right.
even in Polk County, there's hey, well, I thought you lived over in Blacktown. Like, there's always a name, not given by the neighborhood, but
right.
You know,
by the association or by the ethnicity. So what's been up with you, Cut?
Nothing. I've been trying to figure out technology, tuning into. We were talking about like making a YouTube channel and all that.
Right.
Like there is the Cuddy Neckbone Zone. It exists.
Okay, let's do it.
And interesting. It's just kind of like the podcast. It's a lot of human relations, societal issues. Like you said, you can't get away from law enforcement and not to bash it, but
right.
A lot of things I've seen lately, and coincidentally, as I was saying, it was coming out of like Florida's kind of simmered down a little bit, but Alabama, Louisiana, frickin' Texas, like the old. I mean, it's very old turn of the century police work going on right now out there, and it's horrible.
Why do you think that's so?
I think they're getting back to the training. The training, you know, not to sound like a old dinosaur or whatever, but back in the 90s, and you know, you have people going from the 70s and 50s. It's kind of the same thing. When you were trained to be cautious. You weren't trained to be afraid. And it seems like they're training officers to be more afraid than tactical or cautious, because they're introducing guns into non-gun situations because they let their minds work themselves up to that. I mean, you're pulling guns on people on a regular basis now. I know there is a time to pull guns on people,
right.
But you also have to assess what you're looking at before you do it.
Well, I'm also seeing that in the civilian sector also. Now everybody wants to have a concealed weapons permit.
Right.
Everybody feel like if I'm armed or if I, brandish my firearm, that's going to, defuse this situation.
That's a horrible idea because it does the opposite.
You had a few years on me before you when you came in, and you probably remember verbal judo.
Oh yeah, it saves your life more than once,
right.
And you don't really realize it.
Right. Now there is a time and place for verbal judo, and then there's a time and place for introducing your firearm to defuse something. But I think that a lot of people are going straight to that. And that includes our law enforcement as well. You don't need to walk up on everybody's car with a firearm or
No, because sometimes
that's escalating.
it's escalating, and it's funny you said, because verbal judo back then, there's always that one guy on the squad,
Right.
love him to death, will remain unnamed,
No,
but
call nobody.
no, that was just, but yeah, he was just one of those guys that, whether, I'm going to go, the world wasn't as crowded back then, but reputation was he would escalate something rather than, de-escalation wasn't a thing back then, for the record. I'm not going to sit there and have a case of presentism. It wasn't a thing.
Right.
But sometimes it's like, back then it was like, wow, you just need something that was here, just because y'all amped up. And they had started that, and they sent him to verbal judo. And when he came back, you ever watch Clockwork Orange?
No, I never.
Oh, anyway, but Clockwork Orange, like, they had to rehabilitate this thug, and they had him like in a room with his eyes open with like toothpicks, and and it's like because he came back and he was straight, and we're like, what the hell they do to you?
It was probably learned behavior, man. He probably was trained like that.
Yeah.
But such as being trained to pick up the brass, and then you find, like down in Miami, the shooting at the Dayland Mall. They found brass in those guys' pockets because that's how they was training on the range.
We went through all of that. They were stacking their freaking casings,
right?
All kinds of stuff.
But something as simple as that, that's probably the way he was trained, was to escalate as soon as you come upon whatever scenario you had.
Yeah, and that's the truth. But because sometimes most cases, all the time, you have to step back and take a look.
Right.
And you can't. One thing you can't. There's no such thing as routine.
Nothing's routine.
I can't stand routine, domestic routine, traffic. Nothing's routine.
Right. Well, that lays into so much. Well, more on the patrol side, or investigation patrols, whatever nature that you're involved in that atmosphere. But nothing's routine. Everything is different. Even if you come upon the same person, and it's a different scenario, so why are you treating the routine? Maybe that first day they want to talk. Maybe the second day they don't want to